Welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast, where our purpose is to help create a better future. Learn from our world's experts how to improve your organisation sustainably. Learn how to achieve and sustain an excellence journey for yourself, others, and the planet.
And I'm your host, Brad Jevons, coming to you from Brisbane, Australia. We are proudly brought to you in association with SA Partners, a world-leading business transformation consultancy. SA Partners are a truly purposeful company focused on helping organisations achieve sustainable improvement for themselves, others, and the planet. Welcome back to Series 3 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast for 2022. I can't believe the show is going into its third year. I hope you have all had a very safe and joyous Christmas and New Year. I'm so looking forward to the guests we've got coming up for you. Emily and I would like to thank all of you as our listeners for supporting us and the feedback you give us, and for helping us all create a better future through the work that you do from the learnings through this podcast and everything else that you do. Today, we have our first guest of the year, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 68 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast. It's such a pleasure to have Diana Jones on the show with us today. Diana is an author, trainer, and coach in the fields of leadership. Diana is focused on helping leaders and teams shift their behaviours to connect relevantly for powerful results and sought-after cultures. Diana's new book, Leadership Levers, Realising the Power of Relationships for Exceptional Participation, Alignment and Team Results, has just been released. Let's get into the episode. Diana, thank you so much for joining us today.
Wonderful to be here with you, Brad. Yeah, thanks for having me on your show.
Diana, what's your backstory? What brought you into the field of leadership and leadership coaching and development?
I really like that question because I'm someone who believes your experiences really influence what you do in life. So I was born in a very small town in New Zealand in the South Island, Te Waipunamu. The town was called Temuka, so it was a couple of thousand people. And I was in a traditional family, mum and a dad, and older brother, younger sister. So I was the middle child. But I was also quite an observant child and very quiet in those days. And what I noticed was that my brother was a lot closer to my father and my sister was very close to my mum. And so that kind of, yes, they were my parents, of course, but I was left a bit to my own devices. And so I became very intrigued as I grew up at what was the structure of our family, considered normal in those days. And yet what I could see was a dynamic inside the family. So my mum and dad fought a lot, but you never see that when you look at the structure. So I got very interested in what was invisible and how to make the invisible visible. And it's been quite a theme in my work. Then I went teaching as a young woman, and I taught at Hillary College in South Auckland, which has a high ethnic community. And there were some events at that school that really affected me. So a 14-year-old boy stabbed his sister, and then 5 boys, 13 and 14-year-olds, were killed in a car accident. They were terrible tragedies. But what I saw is that both those events brought the community together in a way, and I became very observant of that, of what the more experienced teachers were doing and how they brought people together. And what I also noticed is that I would get chosen for leadership roles. So while I was only a first or second year teacher, I was invited to run, there's a big education reform in New Zealand at that time, and I was invited to run a regional group of teachers. And of course, being young, I said yes, and did a reasonable job. And what I found is if I asked a particular question, a lot of people would respond and listen to one another, and it seemed to progress the group. So I got very interested in that. And then I taught at Victoria University in Wellington for 9 years, actually. And what I learned there was the difference between theory and practice. And partly it was because some of the study I've done in political science, and Chris Argyris was one of the people that we studied, and he's got his espoused theory and theory in action. So I became very interested in how ideas are put into practice. So often you have a theoretical idea, but it doesn't work. And of course, I was what was called an academic supervisor, and our graduates would do 6-month placements in organisations. So I was working alongside senior executives who were what's called the field supervisor, and we'd talk about the students' development. And their area was theory into practice in organisations. So while I was doing that, I got asked a lot, what do you see in our organisations? Like people are stressed, why would that be? And I had become very opinionated by then. And so I'd say what I thought. And then I thought I'd better learn what I'm talking about. And so I had a chance to go to Australia and to Melbourne particularly, and had 6 weeks there. And I started to go to groups, psychodrama groups. And I found those intriguing because the content was people's lives. And it showed me a whole new way of learning. So not just information in, content out, but people processing and reflecting and making sense of what was happening in their lives and then responding. And I was very drawn to that as a way of learning, as opposed to the academic life that I'd been leading. And so from there, went and worked at a what was called the New Zealand College of Management, which was built on a former administrative staff college. And the way of learning was usually 40 leaders together, residential for a month in those days. And I'm talking about the 80s, long time ago now, sometimes called the olden days. So, but what I saw for leaders to learn, they learned as much from one another as they did from the leader, whoever was taking the session. And so I began to explore that way of learning a lot more. And essentially that's what my book is based on, is we're not taught, leaders are not taught how to lead groups, and neither are people taught how to participate in groups. So you get this kind of wild, people who rabbit on for yonks, or don't say anything. You get very unusual behaviour in what's like a serious thing. Businesses running businesses and providing services for people. It's a big deal. So yeah. I thought I would write the book that would help leaders become fantastic leaders of groups as well as people.
It's amazing. It's certainly needed, especially when you talk change and transformation. There's got to be a conversation involved to do that, doesn't there? And where do conversations happen? They happen in meetings and gatherings.
Well, one of the things I say in the book is that the shift that leaders need to make is being from managers of meetings to guardians of group development. And that's a describable process. And there are describable things that leaders can do that make them really effective. I mean, you'll know from your work that getting the right people in the room and having the right kind of structure to have a conversation makes a profound difference to people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Even when you start talking elements like cross-functional collaboration and elements like that, it's dramatic, the change that can happen with the right conversation.
Yeah. And it just as who talks to whom, how you do that. And when the leaders talk across those boundaries, it's very easy for their staff to do that too. But if they don't, you get the silo. Yeah.
Don, I can really see throughout your career or your life, you've had this real passion about observing behavior and relationships and interconnectedness between people. And that's evolved into what you've done in your career. And also, you mentioned there something that's really powerful is that learning through reflecting, reflective learning. And then now you're really focused on, well, how do we bring it all together? And you put that in the book. It's a real credit to you. But some of those elements you mentioned are just so powerful, aren't they?
Yes. Well, it's a funny thing that learning is kind of considered to be, as I say, information in, content out. And there's this idea that kind of logic, rationality, and all of those things, they're highly valued in organisations. But it's not actually how work gets done. And it's not what connects people. It's a whole other area of life that creates real connections among people. Yeah. And it requires, and usually those connections get made in social settings, like you. I've been to thousands of conferences, and half the conferences I go to, especially nowadays, people are sitting on their computers. I went all the way to San Francisco to go to a conference, and came out in one of the breaks really keen. There were people from Germany and all over the world there, really keen to talk to everybody, and they were all on their computers.
Wow.
It was just extraordinary. But what I notice in a lot of team development is that people rely on the dinner before the team development day or several days or the breaks in between at conferences for all the real information to be shared, which is sometimes content, but as much as that, it's about the individual's life that people find out about. And that's where the connections get made, is based on shared experiences. And
true.
I think the art form, I mean, I've made it my life study, really, is to study relationships, and it's how to translate that into organisation practice and not be scared of it.
Yeah, because like you reflect on all the things that really stand out in your life, and predominantly it's events leading up to or the morning of. Like for me, Boyd Rose, a friend of mine, spilling eggs on my new tie that he was wearing because I didn't have it. Like the connection that built. I don't know how much we're good
and
friends.
The feelings behind it.
Yeah, the feelings behind it. Like you can remember so many elements of being at conferences, but it's not actually the conference you remember.
That's right. It's the people you meet and the experiences that you have and the connections that you make that I know in my life, most of those been enduring and very important. Yeah. And I think in organizations, we underestimate that massively. You know, the value of that. There's kind of, so that's what I wanted to write about.
Yeah.
And to speak about with you too.
It's brilliant. Thank you. But I think, how often does the word culture get put out there? We so often talk about culture. Culture's so critical. Back to Drucker presumably back to Drucker back in the 50s, who's a strategic expert, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yes.
So it's so important. And I'm really looking forward to unpacking your book, because in your book, you've put some real, actually practical ways, things we can do to help shift that dial and create that more powerful team culture. Do you mind? There's one part of the book that you wrote, Dana. You talk about leaders holding themselves back. It being like they have their foot on the brake with their teams. So in a car, they got their foot on the brake with the teams. Do you mind explaining this and what you mean by that?
Well, yeah, I just see it again and again, and in that the leaders that I work with, and like I'm in a really privileged position because I get invited a lot and to work alongside senior leadership teams. So I see them, they're absolutely best in the country and other parts of the world. And what I see is like an overvaluing of what's called the hard stuff, like information, technology, logic, all of those things, decision making, highly valued. And what's been avoided is the so-called soft stuff, which is people, relationships, and behaviour. And the irony is that you can only get progress by working with the soft stuff. And organisations have habitually bundled that out to HR as if this group of people know all about relationships.
Yeah.
Well, my experience is they might know that, but they don't know how to apply it in organisations. And so like really serious things, like I was involved in one organisation where there was like a real behavioural incident, and the HR group took over a year to manage the investigations. So people were on leave for a year. Now, the loss of productivity of that is just massive, and it's so unnecessary. So what I'm saying is that leaders have got their arms around their content and information and logic and all this kind of stuff, where actually it's the way they can help people interact with one another that is at the core. So by taking their foot off the brake, they really learn how to work with groups and how to work with people. And it is a learnable thing. It's just that none of the business schools have adequately approached it. So I thought I'd give it a go.
It's great. Go to enterpriseexcellencepodcast.com/downloads to download the 6 principles for exceptional meetings Diana has kindly provided us. Please like, subscribe, and share this podcast to help others gain insights and create a better future. Let's get back into the episode. Dana, so in the book, I know you write about the levers to enable, a leader to take the foot off the brake and release that potential, empowering the team. Do you mind if you just take the audience listeners through those levers? We'll explore those. It'd be great.
Well, there's some really good news because there's lots of them. And in a way, it doesn't matter which ones you decide to learn and to use. But I've made a few notes here, so I'll just have a bit of a look. But there's one thing is to read the emotional tone of the group, and then to take how you relate to that. So once you do that, like, it creates a freedom. So I'll go to an example. Like, I was working with this group of leaders. So there was a senior executive and 4 of his managers, and each of them had been elevated in the organisation. So in our structural language, one had become a deputy chief executive from being a general manager, and the other 3 managers to general managers. And what they were discovering was that when you become a general manager, it's not, it's like do this, do that kind of thing, or it's not linear anymore. And they were grappling with that. And this manager was known as being like very technically oriented. And in a moment of very good coaching and brilliance on his part, he said, I know this is tough. I know this is really hard, but what I want you to do is this. And visibly, I could see these managers completely relax, and they felt understood, and then they felt they were open to learning. So something as simple as that in reading the tone of a group makes a significant difference. And so often with the groups that I work with, I will get the group themselves to say, okay, what is the tone, emotional tone of our group? And you hear things like curious, reserved, bit nervous, anticipation, and friendly. So you've got lots of different qualities going at the start of a meeting that you can actually build on. Or when things are not going so well, you'll get frustration, annoyed, angry. And so the leader actually has to respond to those things and recognize them. They don't have to cure them. They have to be able to mirror them back to the group in a way that makes sense to the group, but gives the group freedom, or the people in the group freedom, to express themselves. So that's one of the levers.
Do you mind if we explore that just a little bit? Because
sure.
that's amazing. Like, you're talking about reading the emotional tone of a group,
yes.
But the way to do it is just verbalize it as a team.
Yes.
Open up, talk about it, talk about the behaviors, the feelings that are going on. Because I had a scenario only yesterday where I was in a factory where they're really struggling. They're struggling. Their deliveries double the delivery time it should be. And there's not a full awareness at the minute. And I was in there for only a short time. And I just asked the question is, does everyone know the challenge that's going on at the moment? And I guess in a way it was asking to read the tone of what's going on. But really no one knew in the factory what was going on. No one in the factory knew. The emotional tone was actually one of the other way, where they didn't have a clue how bad, that things were bad and weren't going well. But
they didn't know the expectations of their managers,
and there was frustration from the leadership, because the leadership were concerned that there wasn't enough action going on. But then actually it's not the causal factor, but starting to head down that emotional tone of why the factory is just so calm still is because they don't know there's a challenge going on, or they're not truly aware of it. So the emotional tone that's why the emotional tone's there.
Nor it sounds, that they've been invited, what do they see that they could do that would shift a difference? Just simple questions. I think that's like such a classic example of the frustration, and that creates that gap between leaders and their staff, and, among managers, is that there's just a frustration because the emotional tone isn't taken into consideration, but it gives leaders such a like a map And you don't need to explore it particularly, but to recognize that it is incredibly frustrating at the moment, because there's the pressure of what the managers want, but the staff don't know why they want it. Simple things in a way.
Yeah.
So that's one of the main levers. Your example's brilliant. It's just that's exactly who I'm writing for.
Yeah. Let's connect. Let's have that conversation about what's most important, which is the emotional tone and emotional feeling of what's going on at the moment. And you can then unpack it and explore it a bit, can't you? Thanks, Dana. That's brilliant.
So I've got several levers. Like I've said, there's literally hundreds, but I'll go through a couple. So another one is that the first 4 minutes of any meeting, like formal meeting, is absolutely crucial for leaders. And if leaders do 6 things in those first 4 minutes, they transform the experience of their meeting. So instead of going in with like a huge stack of papers, for a meeting, they go in thinking about the experience they want to create with a group. And I'll just run through what the 6 things are. So if they do a very simple thing by just saying, hello, everyone, so an inclusive welcome. So they recognize everyone there. It's so simple. An appreciation, like, thank you for coming. Thanks for being here. A little bit like our interaction at the start of this podcast. They're just very simple principles if you unpack them. The third one is to make an I statement. And at that moment, you're actually taking the leadership of the group and everyone recognizes it. And it might be something as simple as, I'm really looking forward to the problems we're going to solve today. So really, I'm really looking forward to us working together today. Or it's such a simple thing, but it comes from the I, and it can be just whatever's in the moment. And the third thing is to appreciate people's experience. Like, this is so undervalued because it sounds smarmy, but saying something along the lines of, you're all bringing lots of experience of our business together, to our work together today. So, and I'm wanting us to tap into that. Yeah. So it's recognizing that the people there are not blank slates. They're talented, experienced individuals in their lives and in the business. And it's recognizing that. And then the next thing, the fifth thing, is to be purposeful, like to say, I don't know how many meetings that you've been to where you've been bored out of your tree, or you've not said anything, or other people have rabbited on about stuff that's irrelevant, and you go out and you think, what an absolute waste of time. Well, I'm against that. Those meetings have got to stop. So having a purpose for your meeting and an outcome. And the power of having an outcome is that you can relate whatever you do to either your strategic goals or day-to-day operations, and something really specific that inspires people. Like, this will help our clients do X. Like, this will make a radical difference to the way the staff do Y. So everything that gets discussed in a meeting will have a powerful impact and improve the condition of the organisation. And that's your intention. So if that's articulated, people think, oh, great, I'm at the right meeting, or I'm out of here. This is not my meeting. But people don't do that. So many leaders don't do that. They just assume the purpose is known, and it's not. And then the final thing is to create a question that really taps into people's experience and expertise, and then say how you want people to participate. So I was in a meeting of like almost 20 executives yesterday, and you cannot hear from 20 people. Like, if everyone talks to 2 minutes, every item's a 40-minute item, and most people talk longer than 2 minutes. So if you say, I want to hear from 5 of you who really are motivated, or whatever your invitation is. In a smaller group, you can hear from everybody. Like, let's hear your best idea on how we could grapple with this. Now, that gets a certain type of contribution, and it's much more tailored. So when people know how they can participate, it creates a great relief.
That's
so those are the 6 things. And if you do that, takes 4 minutes. Even if you speak very slowly and I speak very quickly. So if you take those first 4 minutes to do those things, the group will actually run itself, and you move away from having to be the content expert to be the manager of the group process.
Yeah.
And people come out of the meetings enlivened. They see stuff's getting done and decisions can get made. So it's a completely different setup. Yeah.
I love that, Diana. And the two connect, don't they? Because the first thing you mentioned was read the tone. So first of all, it may be the requirement to read the tone and say, well, how are we emotionally? What are you feeling? What are you sensing? And then you're setting the tone in such a positive way for the meeting, aren't you?
Well, that's another thing that has a big impact. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, basic human elements of, saying hello to everyone, thanking everyone for their time and their contribution, because they're putting time into any meeting that someone comes to, having an I statement, which really shows an element of vulnerability, appreciating people for their knowledge and experience and what they're bringing to the meeting, then going into the purpose of the meeting and the outcome that you sought or seeking to really bring that motivational piece in there, but also the focus.
So it's a focus.
Yeah. And then creating a question that, taps into everyone and gets everyone engaged, but also being clear on how to participate.
Yes.
It's a great
big
system.
difference.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. I in my psychodrama training, I had thousands and thousands of hours in groups. I worked out about the groups I loved being in and the groups I did not love being in, what the elements were, and came up with these. Yeah.
Nice. So, Dana, people are going to be able to get hold of your book and go through many different levers and explore. And, it mightn't be, every lever mightn't be their gap or what's needed, but one of the levers might really help them unleash and take things to another level with what they're doing in their team.
I think so. I think that's one of the things I feel really pleased about with this book, is that you don't have to do them all. If you chose 3 or 4 and really practice them and fine tune them and worked out what works for you, like most of these things you'd tailor for yourself. And if you work out those things, it makes such a radical difference to people's experience of being in meetings and sorting things out and problem solving and really making a worthwhile contribution. And so you talked about culture before, when people feel satisfied and valued, and it's through what they can contribute. That's when people feel they want to belong.
Yeah. A leader will be able to get hold of your book, read it, reflect on their own position and what's occurring, or do an emotional tone review with their team and what's going on. And then from that, choose the few levers that would really help them take it up to another level.
Yes. In the book, I give a couple of practices, like how you can do an exploration about what's happening behind a leadership team, or how you can observe, like say if a leadership team decide to observe themselves, as a leader decides to observe the leadership team for a couple of months, and then think about, or even a month, like so you get a few meetings under your belt, you can sort out, the emotional tone. What are 6 observations you might make about this meeting? So one I was in yesterday, like the chair did an absolutely brilliant job and really fine-tuned. What I noticed in this, it was a large group, is that everyone participated with ease, whether they were online or in the room. And I found that quite remarkable. And the contributions were insightful, and they were not long, boring responses to things. So all of that went really well. But what I also noticed was that there was absolutely no decision process in the group. So the group didn't have a way of making decisions, which would be pretty impossible with such a large group anyway. But so no decisions were made. And a lot of it was like reporting what people were going to do as opposed to business results. And so if you make a couple of recommendations that the group might change in the next couple of weeks, you can really build and make or ensure the group develops. So there's simple tools like that in the book that people can use. Yeah.
I know that's a key one that I see. I see a lot of meetings occur where they're reporting meetings, And there's a lot of time put into just reporting back, regurgitating numbers and information that you could read on a document before you even come to the meeting.
Well, I think you should.
Yeah.
I think that everybody, and I mean everybody, should do their 5 bullet point email on Fridays to their boss, basically. These are the 5 results I've got, nailed this, so-and-so's we've appointed so-and-so, really anticipating they're going to do a great job, 5 things. Then any risks and alerts, they want their manager to be known, to know. And then just what they're anticipating next week. And everyone sends that Friday email in, and that leaves any conversation you have in a leadership team meeting or in one-on-ones, your agenda's free to talk about the stuff that's important, because the managers know what's going on and know where their spotlight wants to be. So both people can really focus on what they want to talk about rather than this kind of laborious, time-consuming reporting. And people tend not to report results. They tend to report activities, which makes it super boring.
Yeah.
So I met with so-and-so, or what?
Yeah.
But if you nailed this or you've resolved that, it makes a profound difference. Yeah.
You're creating there too a system of reflection each week too, which is powerful because a lot of people can go through week after week after week without reflecting. But through that simple system that you mentioned there, that there is a behavioral reflection that happens.
It is, but it also, what it builds up is a really solid track record of results. And so when you have your performance review meetings, if you've been writing these on a weekly basis, you can really see what you've achieved, what you've developed. And it's a very good foundation for anyone to have a conversation about performance. Yeah.
That's brilliant. What a great episode. Thank you, Dana, so much for your time. I've gained so much knowledge already. Come back next week for episode 69 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast, where we delve into Dana's new book, Leadership Levers, further, and a lot of her learnings that will all help us create a better future. Bye for now.